Today I'm chatting with jazz guitarist, educator, and entrepreneur Brent Vaartstra. How are you today, Brent?
I am doing super good, David. Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So, when did you first start getting into music? When did you realize this is something you wanted to make a career out of?
I think like a lot of kids, I had that rock star dream probably when I was like 10 years old. So that I'm pretty sure it started there where I was really excited about it. And just being in rock bands and in high school and just nerding out on music. I don't know. I always loved it. I loved the idea of it. It was near the end of high school where I became really into jazz. I found, kind of a small pocket in my town with a great teacher and got involved with some other musicians, like-minded students who were really into jazz. And so, long story short, that caused me to, become obsessed and go to jazz school out in New York City, which is where I live today. And now I make my living primarily off my jazz education website, learnjazzstandards.com, and also do some gigging around here as well.
So from aspiring rock star to jazz musician, that's the obvious path,
Yeah,
Actually,
I know. What was I thinking? I don't even know, but that's what happened.
Like we kind of joke here in Calgary, you can go and get paid $100 per gig as a rock musician, or you can go play country and be paid $500 per night for the same amount of time and effort.
Right. Which one should I do?
Yeah, exactly. So that, some amazing rock guitarists do find themselves moving over to country, and I know some people like that. But no, that's really cool. So your bio mentions the fact that you came from Boise, Idaho, performed in notable venues there, and then you moved to Seattle, Washington, and finally to New York City in 2010. And in that time, you spent a lot of time performing and learning from a variety of people. So talk about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. In Seattle, I went to an arts college there, Cornish College of the Arts, which was a great school. And I learned from a lot of great teachers there. I think ultimately I just wanted to be in New York. That's kind of the jazz mecca for people. People tell, it's almost like if you don't live in New York, people are telling fables and stories about, what's going on in New York and what's happening there. I think with a lot of the arts, but especially in the jazz world. So I wanted to be there. So I after a year in Seattle, I moved on to New York City, where I've been living for the past 9 years of my life or so. And I studied with some great musicians. I went to the City College of New York there, and bassist John Patitucci was there at the time when I started attending. I studied with great guitarists named Victories. Peter Bernstein, one of my idols. I got to see incredible musicians literally every single night. I was blowing all of my money on pizza and going to jazz clubs. So that was huge for me, just being around all these amazing teachers, but also just incredibly talented musicians. Like you never felt so small than when you first moved to New York from a smaller little scene, and then realizing that you're really nothing compared to what's actually going on. But that's also a great learning experience, a great place to grow and be challenged.
The closest thing we have in Canada, I guess, is Montreal. If you want to do jazz, that's where you go to. And I know some people have certainly done that. We don't have anything near the scale of New York in that sense, but it is definitely a great arts town.
I love Montreal. One of my favorite cities, actually, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I've heard it's amazing to visit. I've actually never been myself.
Oh, got to get out there.
Definitely. Yeah. I think the furthest I've been is maybe central Canada. And I haven't been to the east all that much, but there's a lot of beautiful stuff out there. So you're playing jazz, and, I'm just wondering, like, how profitable was that for you at that time?
Well, I think like any musician that's trying to make it off of performing, it's always a struggle. And, actually, believe it or not, in the jazz world, there are lots of opportunities to make probably a lot more money, at least in the New York scene, than a rock musician could, for example, because you can play all these kinds of private parties and background gigs or, wedding cocktail hours. So there are opportunities, but also at the same time, because, everyone and their dog and every, prodigy student from around the world comes and someone moves to New York to try to play jazz, you're also dealing with a competitive environment, and also a place where rates are kind of lower than you would expect for casuals, and so it was tough. I remember thinking to myself, like as college was ending, and I knew it was coming. I have these student loans I have to pay for. I have I have to pay my rent in New York City. The rent is high. Like, how am I going to do this? And I was already hustling gigs as hard as I could. And so, when college came out, it was over. I was, going crazy, trying to get as many students as I could, trying to hustle as many gigs as I could, looking at those blank spaces on my calendar, as we all have done if you've ever tried to make a living doing music primarily on performing. And it's tough and it's hard, and it can be done. I have friends that still do it. But luckily for me, in the background with all that, I had my jazz education website, learnjazzstandards.com, working, and things were brewing with that. And I was working on that in the background. And little did I know then, I would eventually make a full-time living off of that blog, podcast, and videos. And that really completely changed my life as a musician.
I think it was over 10 years ago that I interviewed my friend JJ Soriano, who's a fantastic jazz guitarist. And I think at some point he actually decided to leave music as a hobby so that it didn't have so much pressure for him to make money on. But he shared some of the similar sentiments you did, that like there were so many different types of gigs available as a jazz musician. It was just a matter of being connected with somebody who could hook you up with those gigs. And
yes.
If you weren't connected in that way, then it was a real challenge. So that definitely speaks to like the importance of networking and knowing people, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course. If you're that's a big part of it, actually, is especially in New York, there's the whole jazz jam scene, and these jam sessions, they'll start at midnight. The house band will play for an hour, and then at 1 o'clock in the morning, they open it up to everybody else, and then they go till 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's pretty much every night. Many different clubs around the city are doing this sort of thing. So that's definitely something that a lot of people do nowadays. That's not now. I don't do that stuff anymore. I mean, my life has obviously changed with the direction my career's gone into, but the networking, especially in a pretty hot scene like New York, is essential.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what I hear from so many people I've talked to this point. So you decided to build Learn Jazz Standards website. What was your thought process behind that?
Yeah, well, the actual motivation was a survival motivation, like I was kind of alluding to earlier. It was this feeling of, well, first of all, it's tough to make it as a living, just teaching private lessons and just trying to find as many gigs as possible. It's not easy. And then, but even further and beyond that, I started realizing, well, there's a cap to how much I can actually make anyways. There's a certain point where it's going to stop. Like, I can't move up any further. There's not enough time in the day. My industry won't allow it, unless I break through and become famous, which I had no illusions that was going to happen. So it really came from a survival mode. But how I actually got started into making Learn Jazz Standards is a little bit of a different story from most entrepreneurs, in that actually back in 2010, a friend of mine who was teaching elementary band and music to elementary kids, he started up the original website. A friend of his threw a little blog together for him. He worked on it for a summer, and he couldn't keep up with it, and so he reached out to me after that summer and said, "Hey, Brent, I started this thing. I think it's interesting. You're in college. You're doing jazz. How about you just sort of start doing this?" And so, a long story short, eventually my friend really couldn't do much of anything with it. And so I took full control of it. And that's where I really started making things happen. I started changing the website, changing the focus, changing the direction. I started a podcast. I started videos. I started making products. And, the rest is history with that. But that's where things really started to take off. And, it was around that time when I was just getting done with college where I started really throwing my entire self into it. Because I felt like there was potential there. I felt like I was onto something, and I was making a lot of mistakes. I was screwing up a lot. I didn't know what I was doing, but every time I learned something new, a light bulb went off, and I started realizing, there's something here, and I think I can maybe make just my rent off of this website. Maybe I can do it, and I'm doing something I love. I'm teaching jazz. I'm doing music. I'm getting to work on this stuff. Now it makes a lot more than just my rent. So that's more than I thought was possible.
Yeah, it's true. Like, I guess unless you're scanning Empire Flippers all day looking for websites to buy, you're not necessarily starting with somebody else's website and building it up to a certain point. Although I'm sure a lot of website owners would love to see that and maybe even sell their website to someone who can take it to the next level. So that's super cool.
Yeah, Empire Flippers. I recently discovered Empire Flippers and was looking through that. That's very interesting that you mentioned Empire Flippers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of online marketplaces for websites, but that's kind of I think that's kind of the main one of the best ones out there, honestly. And they have a great podcast too. I'm a fan of that show. So how did you come to realize that there was such a hungry market in jazz? Is that something you knew when you started building the website?
I think not at first, because I didn't really, like I said, I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know what to expect. I really was just doing it because I was sort of passionate about it. And I also looked on it as an opportunity to, learn myself, because a lot of the things that I was starting to teach or make resources for were things that were actually just helping me practice. And at the time I was an absolutely obsessed musician, practicing, ridiculous hours, and, just had no other life than practicing and playing music, and, that whole story of things, So, I mean, I didn't know that there was a market for it necessarily, but as I started learning more, I started realizing that, as I started seeing, hey, there's more visitors coming to my website. Like, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that, I was supposed to be sending emails, and I just checked my, mailing list, and I have 800 subscribers. Oh my goodness. Like, I didn't even know that was possible. And that's when I started to realize, oh, there are people out there. They're listening to me. They actually care. And how do I reach more people? How do I find more, and how do I figure out who exactly are these people that are out there? What do they want from me, and how can I serve them better?
I definitely remember those days of obsessively practicing, and I would talk to other musicians and they would talk about their 3-hour days and all that. But I think what you soon realize, especially if you get into something like this, where you're podcasting and blogging and updating your website and interacting on social media, you actually can't sustain that forever.
Oh no, you definitely cannot. In fact, I did an episode on my Learn Jazz Standards podcast, where I literally woke up in the morning. I was like, it's podcast recording day. I really need to practice, though. I'm a little out of practice. I haven't had the time lately. It was a busy season. So I literally did an episode called a maintenance practice session. I basically walked people through how to do a maintenance practice session, but really I was just practicing for them. And actually that one was really well received by people.
Yeah, super cool idea. Yeah. But, I think I had like 2 or 3 years where I was like, okay, I'm setting the goal of practicing 3 hours a day, and I would meticulously track every minute, and I didn't reach that goal that year. So then next year I tried again and meticulously tracked every minute. And I was like, okay, I made it. And so that's kind of the level of effort that it takes. And I think I duplicated that again and went on to write 365 songs in a year, which is a whole story unto itself.
Wow.
But
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, but there's a lot of junk, man.
Oh, sure. But I'm sure that that's inspiring. Because that's what every composer always tells me. It's like, wow, you just write a ton of music, and half of it might suck, but there might be some gold that kind of sticks out of all of that stuff. So wow, that's inspiring, man. Well,
there was a couple of songs that still I perform live to this day. Maybe not as often as I used to, but they're still great songs, and people love them, and they know me for them. So
oh, that's awesome. Wow.
Now, we can definitely see that this was not an overnight process. So how long did it take for you to build LJS into a 6-figure business?
Yeah, it did take a while. Like I said, at the beginning, it was sort of just not really knowing what I was doing, not really understanding the potential of what was happening. So, really, if I'm to be exact, it took around 8 years or so for that to actually happen. But that's because there wasn't a lot of action on my part until probably around 4 years ago, where I really started putting my back into it and started learning and started, understanding and learning from my mistakes. And so, the big game changer for me was, when I started realizing that I needed to find the right products for my audience. And I remember the first time I made an ebook. It was a jazz etudes ebook, and I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know anything about launching a product. But I remember sending that sales email out, not really knowing what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden watching my inbox and seeing, an email notification. It said, "Hey, you have a sale." I was like, okay, so it looks like this sort of works. So let's take a look at that. And then a second later, another sale. And then a minute later, another sale, another sale, another sale. And that's kind of when the light bulb went up. And I was like, wait a second. This whole time I haven't been giving the right products to them, or haven't been selling to them to my audience at all, and I could be helping them so much more with my products. And so from there I started making e-courses, and then I realized that people loved e-courses, and the type of e-courses that I was making were serving my audience. And so then I started making more ebooks and expanding that. And that's really where the success really started to happen is, of course, the whole time I'm creating really valuable content to build my audience. I'm creating great podcast episodes and blog posts and videos, trying to help and find the pain points of my audience. And in the process of doing that, I'm learning about them so that I know what are the things that they need help with. And those are the kind of products I started to make. And that's where things really started to come together. And and eventually that broke through into, like you said, a 6-figure business.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, I often share with people that it's going to be 2 to 5 years, 2 years if you're very aggressive, 5 years if you're lazy, but still consistent. But sometimes it does take 10 years too. And I make sure I warn people of that, because really there's no accounting for personal biases and preferences and how you learn. And when you have those breakthroughs, like I'm still learning a lot myself as I continue to create new products and share on social media and build this podcast. Like it's ongoing. It doesn't actually end, the learning part.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of what I talk about on my podcast, my newest podcast, Passive Income Musician. Is I'm trying to help people basically, I'm trying to teach them not to make all the mistakes that I made. Right? It's going to take a while. It's going to take some consistency, like you just said. But if you're doing the right things and you're asking the right questions and you have some real strategies in place, you can speed up that process so that you can be making a living online. Specifically, I teach making, teaching music online.
Oh yeah, I think your podcast is like a note for note strategy on what to do.
That's the goal. That's definitely the goal.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to turn that into a book or a course or something like that down the line, you totally could, because you're kind of going from step A to step Z.
David, you seem to have an insight to my brain. So
I can see what you're up to for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. But we're going to get into that. But first, another thing I wanted to get into was the fact that you're author of a couple of Hal Leonard publications. So you got the 500 Jazz Licks and Visual Improvisation for Jazz Guitar. So that's quite the achievement too. How did that come about?
Oh, that's a great question. So, and there's also a lesson in here too, actually. So, it was, I think 4 years ago or so. I wasn't so sure if Learn Jazz Standards was going to succeed. I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't applying. I wasn't educating myself yet. So I wasn't really quite sure, what was going to happen with Learn Jazz Standards. So I thought, I'm going to start another business. And I created this basically online jazz school of sorts where you could sign up to take Skype lessons from, different instrumentalists. And I thought this is going to work. And, I put it out there, and long story short, that business didn't really necessarily succeed. I mean, it made some money, but it really wasn't. It partly maybe because I wasn't able to throw my resources behind it because I was too busy with Learn Jazz Standards, or there could have been a number of other reasons. But the one thing that did come out of it was just putting myself out there. The vice president of Hal Leonard found me and also saw what I was doing on Learn Jazz Standards. And he said, "Hey, I love what you're doing. Would love to see if you'd be interested in writing any of these titles that we are interested in publishing." And I read the email a couple times over, unsure of if it was real or not, deciding that I'll at least, have some faith that it is real, responded back and said, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love to see the titles. And so he gave me a list of titles. The one that I thought was, the easiest that I could probably do was 500 jazz licks. Actually, kind of a ridiculous effort, to be honest with you.
No
500
kidding.
licks was it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But that was kind of my inroad with getting a deal. And it was just simply because I put myself out there. I had a really professional looking website. And of course, having learned jazz standards, maybe at that very moment, I was only making so much money off of learned jazz standards, but it also opened up a huge opportunity for me. And so then, years down the line, I had my own book that I wanted to publish, the visual improvisation for jazz guitar, and just pitched the idea to them, and they liked it. And so, yeah, that's how I got in with Hal Leonard.
Oh, that's great. It's kind of like a freebie, and there aren't too many of those in this industry. Like, yeah, you start to get a few more perks as an online blogger and podcaster, and people might send you their products, and you might get the occasional, hey, could you come on my blog or podcast to talk about this? But there definitely aren't too many freebies. Like, you really got to put the work in for that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's like I could sit here and say, well, David, it's because I'm a very talented musician, and I just stood out like a sore thumb. And the truth is, it did kind of just fall into my lap. But it was the result of simply putting myself out there, creating lots of content. And when you do sort of things like this, like, you never know what's going to happen. So, the best thing you can do is just to start and put yourself out there, and you never know what can come out of it.
Yeah, it's true. And these days, it really isn't about being the most technically capable musician. I think musicians who can engage an audience are winning out on musicians who can play really well and are, lamenting the fact that they can't get anybody to pay attention to their music.
Yeah, and that's something that, and that's why I'm really passionate about teaching people kind of how to do what I do, how to make a living teaching music online and in marketing and all this stuff, because I know a lot of really talented musicians, like so talented that it's hard to believe that they're not just playing and touring all the time. And
Yep.
But the thing that they don't have is they don't have the marketing skills. Like, they just don't know how to promote themselves, and that's something that a lot of us artists can get kind of wrapped up in, is just the art side, and just, that self-indulgent feeling like, we're creating art and now someone should pay attention to me. But that's not necessarily how it works. And if you want to make a business, if you want to make a living doing music in any way, shape, or fashion, you're going to have to learn some marketing skills. You're going to have to learn how to think like a business person. And if you can get those skills, you are going to be so much more likely to succeed, rather than just being absorbed with your art and hoping for the best with that.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons I exist as well. So I totally appreciate that. You're doing a service. So what is one of the biggest challenges you've encountered as an entrepreneur? How did you overcome it?
Ooh, big challenges. A big challenge. There's so many challenges. It's hard to really pick which one. But one challenge is simply being having faith. Really, I think is the biggest challenge. Is things are going to be hard. You're going to come across a lot of roadblocks. There's going to be a lot of obstacles, and you're going to hear people's success stories, and you're going to see their highlight reels as an entrepreneur and like what they're able to do. And you're going to wonder that sometimes in your journey, why am I there, or what am I doing wrong, or do people really care about my message and my story and what I have to offer to them? And it can be discouraging, and it can be, being an entrepreneur, it can be a very lonely adventure. So the challenge is really just to stick with it, to stay with it, to keep creating, to keep having that vision, to not give up. And a lot of people, I think, that don't end up succeeding as online entrepreneurs of any kind, they don't go far enough. It's like that story of that swimmer who was trying to swim to shore, and there was so much fog, and so she gave up, and she went onto the boat and said, I don't know how far it is away. And then when the fog lifted, the shore was literally just like, another 20 feet, 25 feet away or something. Like there's some story like that. And, you should really just keep going. And that's what I did. And like I said to you earlier, David, like I wouldn't imagine that my business would have taken me to where it is if you would have asked me this 4 or 5 years ago. I just wouldn't have imagined it. And so that's that persistence, that keeping the long-term goals in mind and just sticking with it.
That's so important. I was on the Unconventional Life podcast earlier this year, and I shared about this very thing, that in 2014, I was going outside to go for walks during the summer. And every day I would just put on the Fizzle Show, which is a great podcast, by the way. I would put on the Fizzle Show. I would go outside by myself and go for a walk, and then wonder when this stuff was going to happen for me, right? Because they're talking about viral videos and blogs that are taking off and businesses that are doing really well. And I would just be sitting there going, when is this going to happen for me? I'm working really hard on this. So yeah, and I haven't arrived yet either. There's still much to do, but even if I look back on the last 4 years and see what I've been able to do, it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's never, it's always good to, look at your own, what's your personal record? It's not about somebody else. It's about, where have you gone in your business, from when you first started, and just looking at that and tracking that rather than even looking at anybody else and what they're doing.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side of that, what is one of the biggest victories you've experienced as an entrepreneur?
Oh, biggest victories. Also, so many of those. I think just the biggest victory, I won't be so specific. I'll be more broad. The biggest victory is the freedom that this business has given me. Like I said before, like when I was, first really, trying to, get my gigging career going, and it was always this game of stress of, I was making it, but just barely. And it was looking at those empty spots on the calendar. It was, constant hustle, constant struggle. And you can forget about it, going on a vacation. You can forget about, taking some time off, because that means that you're losing money, right? That means that, there's going to be a hole where in your bank account where there wasn't before. So for me, it's really the freedom that making passive income as a musician can give me. I was told this story on my podcast is this year my wife switched jobs, and there's a week in between, and we decided, well, hey, let's take this advantage to go on a little vacation, to get out between these jobs so you can refresh and restart. And because I had built this asset, my jazz education website, because I had built this, I was able to leave on a vacation and still make sales while I was, out traveling, and that's an amazing feeling to have when you realize that, you can take a day off, that you can, take some time. And it's really hard work, and it's hard work to get to that point, but having that freedom is by far the victory. For me, it's not about necessarily having a lot of money. It's not about any of that. It's really about just having that life that I want, and even being able to pursue my own musical, things that I want to do, my own projects. And that can be hard if, making money off of playing music is, what you're relying on. It can be hard sometimes to do exactly what you want to do. So that it's really freedom, I think, is my biggest victory.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I'm in the same boat. That's what I want for my life, to be able to work on any project that I want to of my choosing, and be able to make money while I'm traveling. And I've seen a little bit of that. I've gotten to experience a little bit of that on my journey to this point. So it's amazing. It's an amazing feeling. These days, I don't have to get up and go to a job. So that in itself was a huge accomplishment.
That is super awesome, man. Super awesome.
Yeah. And then, are there any books or other resources that helped you on your journey?
Oh man, so many. And I'm sure that you know a lot of them. So just a lot of the online entrepreneurs out there, Darren Rouse is a blogger. He's the first guy that I really started checking out. Chris Gillibow, Pat Flynn, Amy Porterfield, Chris Ducker. There's so many online entrepreneurs that I really have to thank all of them just for being able to consume their podcasts and their books and all of this great stuff out there that they have to offer. And then just read lots of books that were just inspiring to me. I'm thinking of Chris Guillebau's The $100 Startup, which is a really kind of basic book about how to start an online business, from scratch. But, just some of those ideas, were really inspiring to me. So, there's so many resources out there.
It's true. Like, we could go down the list, and I've certainly tapped into a lot of the resources of the people you just mentioned, and I've been reading The $100 Startup this year. Usually I'm much quicker at reading books, but this year and the last year, I haven't kept to that a book a week program that I was on for a couple of years.
That's a great goal. My goodness.
Oh yeah. I mean, I heard that every CEO generally does read on average 52 books a year. So I said, why not?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I tend to do a lot of reading too. I think that's a huge piece of advice for the audience is just educate yourself in every way possible. And we're talking about business right here. Like, we're not talking about music necessarily, but if you want to make a living off of your music, whether it's teaching it, whether it's, licensing your music, whatever your way is, you're going to have to learn these skills, and so reading and educating yourself, it's so important. It's made a huge difference for me, and it sounds like it has for you too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's only ever a few books that stick with me out of the hundreds that I've read, but I can easily point to those and say I wholeheartedly recommend these 10 books or a dozen books or so. A lot of the other ones may not stick with you, but if you go through that practice of reading, you still benefit from it anyway.
Oh yes, 100%, 100%.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I'm sure people actually want to be able to get to the juicy tactical stuff and things about revenue streams and passive income and all that. So are you willing to come on another episode to share about that?
Oh, I'm definitely willing. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me, David. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time and your generosity, and we'll be back with another episode.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Really appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you for listening. Music in this episode was brought to you by Brian Young. Wherever you're listening to this right now, please consider leaving a 5-star review and comment to help us get the word out about the podcast.